The street was unusually still, the kind of calm that made every small sound feel louder than it should. Daniel Harper tugged gently at the seatbelt to make sure it was secure, then closed the back door of his car. His son hummed softly, distracted by a toy spaceship, unaware of how carefully Daniel balanced every morning, being both provider and protector. Daniel circled to the driver's side, keys already in hand, mentally reviewing his first meeting of the day. The engine hadn't even started when he sensed something was off, a faint shift of air behind him that didn't belong to the quiet routine. The sound came again, barely more than a breath, but it was enough. Daniel stiffened, his hand hovering over the ignition. Years of responsibility sharpened his instincts. Slowly he turned his head. From the narrow space behind the folded seats, a figure moved. A young woman rose into view, as if afraid sudden motion might shatter the moment. Her eyes were wide, alert, and brimming with panic. She raised her hands instinctively, as though expecting to be yelled at. Daniel's pulse quickened, but he stayed still, aware of his son only a few feet away. "I'm sorry," she whispered before he could speak. Her voice trembled, each word carefully chosen. She told him her name was Amina. She hadn't meant to frighten anyone. She just needed somewhere to hide. The words tumbled out unevenly. Family pressure, an imminent forced marriage, no time left to run properly. This car had been unlocked, and desperation had pushed her inside. As she spoke, Daniel noticed small details, the way her fingers clenched her sleeve, the exhaustion lining her face, the practiced fear of someone who had learned not to expect kindness. Daniel listened without interruption. He didn't demand explanations or jump to conclusions. Instead, he focused on staying calm, grounding the moment so it wouldn't spiral. He had learned that panic only feeds panic. Looking at Amina, he recognized something familiar, not the situation itself, but the feeling of being trapped by circumstances beyond control. He remembered his own fear years ago, holding his newborn son alone, unsure how he would manage. Fear didn't always look loud. Sometimes it sat quietly, waiting for someone to notice. He glanced briefly toward the back seat to make sure his son was still absorbed in his world. Lowering his voice, Daniel spoke carefully, choosing honesty over reassurance he couldn't yet promise. He told Amina he didn't know her full story and wouldn't pretend to understand it all. But he did know fear when he saw it, and he knew what it meant to need protection in a moment when options disappear. His words were simple, almost ordinary, but they carried weight. "I don't know your whole story," he said softly, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "But you're safe here." The tension in Amina's shoulders eased, just slightly, as if that single sentence had given her permission to breathe. In that quiet car on a suburban street, two strangers shared a fragile pause, one built on trust, the other on responsibility, and neither of them would forget it. Daniel chose a place that felt normal and safe, somewhere fear wouldn't stand out. The cafe sat on a busy corner, sunlight spilling through wide windows, the low hum of conversation creating a sense of cover. He parked where they could be seen, not hidden. Inside, he ordered something simple for his son and asked Amina if she wanted tea. His calm never felt forced. It was steady, intentional. When he called the local women's support hotline, he stayed beside her, not speaking for her, just present. The counselor's voice on speaker offered clarity, not pressure, options instead of commands. As Amina spoke, her words slowly found rhythm. The shaking in her hands eased, replaced by careful breaths. For the first time in days, maybe longer. She wasn't being rushed or threatened into a decision. She was being heard. Daniel watched quietly, keeping an eye on his son, who happily stirred sugar into his cup. He explained in simple terms that they were helping a friend for a little while. There were no lies, just age-appropriate truth. The normalcy of the moment grounded all of them, reminding Amina that safety could exist alongside everyday life. By early afternoon, a clear plan began to take shape. The counselor coordinated, with a nearby shelter experienced in handling cases like Amina's. Legal aid would be available, along with secure housing and guidance on her rights. Nothing was rushed, and nothing was hidden from her. Daniel admired that. Real help didn't demand trust blindly. It earned it step by step. When arrangements were finalized, relief washed over Amina's face, followed by a quiet disbelief. She had expected resistance, judgment, or conditions. Instead, she found structure, patience, and people who believed her story mattered. When the time came for her to leave, a volunteer arrived to escort her safely. Amina stood near the cafe entrance, sunlight catching in her eyes as she turned to Daniel. Gratitude filled her expression, deep and sincere, the kind that doesn't need many words. She thanked him softly, almost as if afraid the moment might break. Daniel simply nodded, listening. When she said he hadn't been obligated to help, he answered without hesitation. He told her he was raising his son to understand that protection isn't a favor, it's a responsibility. Amina walked away with steady steps, no longer looking over her shoulder. She wasn't just escaping something harmful. She was moving toward a future she could shape herself. Daniel watched until she disappeared from view, then gathered his son and headed back to the car. The drive home felt quieter, thoughtful. He knew the day would blend. Daniel watched until she disappeared from view, then gathered his son and headed back to the car. The drive home felt quieter, thoughtful. He knew the day would blend into many others, but its meaning wouldn't fade. Sometimes change doesn't arrive loudly or dramatically. Sometimes it begins with a single brave choice made in an ordinary moment that quietly changes a life forever.